Hi, I'm Valerie Engelhart. In this video, I am going to be painting a loose atmospheric meerkat based on one I photographed when I visited the Nashville Zoo back in 2022. So it took me this long to actually paint one because anywhere I go, I love to snap lots of pictures in case one day I need some inspiration, and wouldn't you know it, today was that day. I'm picking especially one of my own images because I intend to enter this in watercolor competitions, and many of them stipulate that you can't use photos from like royalty-free websites or photos that you've purchased the copyright for. You have to be the one who took the photo if you are using a photo reference. And so when I go to the zoo, I'm one of those annoying people that's like snapping a bazillion pictures because, I mean, I'm not going to see a meerkat in my yard, so I have to take advantage of whatever time I have. So I'm imagining a hot summer's day, and I splashed the paper with some quinacridone gold and then splashed a little rhodonite genuine, that pink color, just to give a little more visual interest. I am going in without a preliminary sketch. I do have my photo off to the side so I can keep an eye on proportions, but I'm just going for it. And you can see I dropped in a little bit to hint where a face might be. I dropped in some blue, because it's my favorite, Palaiba Diamond Blue, just to suggest shadow. But in this case, I did a few color studies first, and I found that I really liked the studies where I put in unexpected color of like pink and teal blue. So in this one I'm using, I think, 7 colors, which for me is a little more than I usually do, but I really like the result. So I'm keeping everything nice and wet and dropping in unexpected colors so that they can fuse together. And then once I get into the second and third go of things, it looks rather natural, or as natural as putting teal on a meerkat's gonna be. It's good to get those in, and notice I'm not mixing the colors or going in over and over. I'm dropping in a color, maybe making a shape, but for the most part, I'm letting the fusions happen the way they will. I'm blurring the side of my meerkat because I do want some lost and found edges. And because I have that big beam of light, I'm splattering some quinacridone gold. And I love that pattern that was created. That was a happy accident. I didn't intend for that radiating design. And so I'm leaving that alone. I'm going to let that be. If you don't like that, then just go in with water and make it like a soft glow, like in that upper right part. But that expressive splatter, I think, adds extra personality to the piece. And it's something that I couldn't plan. It just had to happen organically. So right now I'm suggesting some of the deeper shadows, and on the meerkat's stomach there are these dark stripes, and so I'm going in with a dark color and just popping in some dark tones. Because my painting is very wet right now, those tones are diffusing wet into wet and becoming very soft. And because watercolor dries pale, and I'm not going in super strong, even though right now it looks like, why are you committing to something right now? You don't have a sketch, you can't really control the water. That's true. I'm just going in and making suggestions, making like little placeholders for me later. We can always change things. I am lifting some of the pigment out from the meerkat's face because I want that to be my focal point, and it was getting a lot of the gold in there, and I wanted to lift some of it out to really have it pop out against the light. Right now, all I'm doing is trying to get like a loose, colorful impression of a meerkat. A little bit of a rainbow fun. And I'm also going to harp on this as well. As far as my colors go, I'm just intuitively dipping into my palette, although I do know what colors I used. I want you to focus on not having to go buy new colors. Use what you have at home, but focus on temperature and value. Focus on your shapes. Like, I could paint this meerkat in a single color and have it look beautiful as long as I get my colors and my values and my shapes correct. Don't know why I said colors. My shapes and my values. Because I've got another video on here of a hedgehog, and I painted that hedgehog blue. You're only going to see a blue hedgehog in people's imaginations and video games. and yet it is recognizable as a hedgehog because I got my shapes correct and my values correct. Which sound like two things, but really, the values make the shapes. But look at some of those lovely watermarks forming. I do have my board. I am painting on, this is my last piece of paper of 12 by 16 Arches rough paper. And I do have it at a little bit of an angle, just propped up slightly so that the water and pigment runs downwards. And I'm keeping the right side of the meerkat with the warmer colors, so I'm using more of the pink. But as things move into shadow, or more to the left, I'm pulling in more of that teal blue. And the brush I'm using is a size 2 quill brush. And I'm going to pop on some salt because that is one of my favorite things to use to bring a little bit of like dusty sparkle. Close up of the face now. I have let the painting dry. And I've got a size 3 synthetic Da Vinci Cosmotop Spin. This is one of my favorite ones to use for, I wouldn't say like the most detailed of work, but when I work large like this, it is my detail brush. And I'm going in with Rockwell Canada Lapis Brown and strengthening like the nose, the mouth, the eyes. Because this area is my focal point, I do want to make sure I create dynamic contrast and a convincing, realistic shape. And one of my favorite things to do is after I put down color, I let it sit for a minute, and then I get a nice thirsty brush, which is clean and dried, and I lift some of that pigment off to create a lighter area, but it's very soft. And then what I'm going to do is let that dry, and then later go in and add the details of the eye. If I try doing it now, the area is too wet and it's just going to diffuse. So patience is key. I'm using that same color, and I'm going to go and paint in its little ear. Now on the right side, I'm using my quinacridone gold, and I'm painting a few jagged dots and unconnected lines to capture the light. And so I'm painting negatively. I'm picking out some spots to outline my meerkat, and then I'm bleeding it away into that sunlit area. And that way, you can see the shape of the meerkat, but there are lost and found edges, like see that part of the cheek? It has no separation from the background, and yet because I have that other information there, our brains process what that outline is without me having to draw it in. All right, moving to the midsection now. I am just painting in where the little claws on its front paws are going to go, because once I know that point, I can build the rest of the arm around that. And I'm not being super precise right now, just getting those little lines that suggest those little claws, and then softening them up into the paw. But notice there's really no distinction between where an arm is and a side and a belly. So I am using the shapes in my wash, as well as my imagination, to pick out where to put in a line to suggest where the arm is. And then the same technique that I used around the head, except this time I am bleeding the color into the body, and that's becoming a shadow. So I'm painting negatively to have the arm pop out because it is forward in space, and then it creates that shadow underneath. I'm gonna drop in some darker, cooler color to help create greater contrast. And a meerkat's nice and soft, so I am letting that color bleed downwards. I am still working at an angle. And I'm using whatever colors are locally nearby. So at this point, I am not going to introduce any new colors. Whatever I've got is what I'm going to use. And because this area has that lovely Paliba Diamond Blue, when I go make my shadow, I'm going to use the color that was there previously, but I'm going to use it in a stronger tone. And also for reference, I have sped this video up to 150%. I wanted it to be slow enough that you could see what I'm doing, but I do go at this painting with care, and you would be here for quite a while if I kept this at real time. suggesting the stripes on the belly again with this wash. And then I'm introducing a lot of water because the meerkat is soft. I want that color to run. And because it's running downwards, the fur grows downwards. I do this to create that illusion without me having to do a lot of work of flicking my brush, trying to artificially create that fur texture, and instead just let the water do it for me. Especially a lot of my pigments are granulating pigments, so they're kind of heavy, and with them being granulating, when water is introduced, they can sometimes form rivulets, and that just creates a wonderful, natural looking texture. Right, going in and painting in some of that chest floof, because even though it is a bit of a shadow, it is up towards the face, it's more in sunlight, so the shadow is going to be very warm. And I need to differentiate the arm a little bit more, so I'm going in with a darker, cooler color. The brush that I'm using for the majority of the painting is a size 8 round brush, a silver black velvet brand, and that is my favorite brush. I do most of my paintings with it. Adding a little more shadow at the neck area because I do see a distinct shadow in my reference image, but I'm keeping it nice and warm because it's up near the face. So it's a shadow, but a lovely warm shadow. Shadows don't have to be blue and they don't have to be dark. There are softer, lighter shadows. There are really deep shadows. There are cast shadows, which I don't deal with a lot in this one. I will have a cast shadow at its feet towards the end, just to ground it in space, because when I took this picture, it was standing on a rock. All right, the belly is still wet, but I am going in now with some really thick pigment. And when I'm doing these stripes, I'm dancing with my brush, making little marks. I'm not going in a straight line, and that helps create that natural fur look. And all that does is take practice, getting used to your pigments and getting used to the wetness of your paper. And the type of paper you use will make a huge difference. I paint on rough paper a lot, so I'm pretty used to how it behaves. But if you gave me hot press paper, it could be same brand, same size, same weight, but just a different surface, and I'll get a very different result. And honestly, with hot press, I wouldn't be as confident. Which makes me think maybe I should use more hot press paper. All right, down at its little tootsies. Doing a similar technique as I did with the hands, just sort of suggesting where those claws are going to be so I can visualize how to do the rest of the foot later. Now, you can kind of see it is standing on a surface, and in this case, it's a rock, and I have let the colors blend and fuse, and I'm going to keep it like that. This area is not my focal point, but it is important. So like I'm going to separate the tail from the hindquarters a bit and definitely add some detail to the legs, but this area is not going to have the same amount of detail and contrast as the upper parts of the meerkat. Now I do want to take a moment and talk about the rock that it's standing on, in that in real life, that rock is a much darker color than what I have illustrated here. However, I am not going to add any more detail into this rock because by doing so, I would be pulling attention down the painting, and that is not where I want the attention. I do want that ghost of a rock there, and I will paint in a cast shadow to anchor the meerkat to where it's standing. But ultimately, our brains can determine, okay, it's standing on something, and if we know anything about a meerkat and the shape that it's standing on, it's probably a rock. And honestly, the viewer doesn't even need to know it's a rock, just that the meerkat is standing on something. So I used, it's a Schminke Tundra Orange to create a lot of that shadow in its inner leg, but then dropped in some of the Poliba Diamond Blue for greater visual interest and to cool things down as that leg gets further away from the light. I'm using the same color that I used on the belly to create the stripes on the leg, and same thing as before. When I was first introducing the stripes, I just put in an idea of it and then washed it away a bit. These stripes on the leg both in real life and for painting purposes, are not going to have the same intensity as the belly. But take a look at that belly really quickly. You can even see some of those little rivulets I talked about that are creating some lovely texture that could make fur easy without having to go and paint it all in cumbersomely. Is that a word? I'm not going to look that up because I'm going to forget after this. Back under its lovely little chin, I've added quinacridone gold because I've noticed that, well, one, I needed to deepen the shadow, and two, I haven't actually really used the quinacridone gold on my meerkat, which I should because I've got so much of it in the background. So put in the gold, popping in more pink because that gold and pink fusion is just such a lovely summery kiss of the sun. And just introducing more color into the belly because I thought it was looking kind of pale. And a little bit of quinacridone gold onto the arm that is in sunlight. And a lovely use of glazing some yellow on a painting is it calls attention to it and it brings it forward in space. So if you ever got something that's looking a little flat, try adding just a light wash of yellow in a part that you want to bring forward. And that's a trick that usually works for me. Now on the side of its arm that is going away from the light, I did the same technique that I did around the face where I added just a couple dots to suggest the outline of an arm and then bled it away into the background using the same color that was already on the background, that quinacridone gold. And doing that negative painting technique again, up around the arm and down the side. I don't want to outline things, so I just do a couple dots, some suggestions of a line, and then have that merge nicely into the background. All right, creating some texture on the side of the leg by using the side of my brush and having it skip on that high toothy texture of my paper. And that's a nice thing about rough press paper. If you lightly skim the surface with your brush, it does create a nice, rough, organic texture. Now, one thing I thought about doing at this point is the tail, I do just let fade into the distance. I considered, because the tip of the tail is a much darker color, putting that in, but it has the tail. I suggest that the end of the tail becomes darker with the color that I chose. And so ultimately I decide to leave that alone, let it fade into the rock, and let that area be lost. And I think that was the right decision. I think if I had tried to add more detail into the tip of the tail, it would create a similar problem as if I tried to paint in the rock. It would have called way too much attention to that bottom area of the painting, which is not what I wanted. So part of painting is not just knowing what to put in, it's what to leave out. All right, I've grabbed a filbert and it's nice and stiff. I like this paper and the pigments I use because it's really easy to lift them. That one leg was a little too thick for my liking, and so I just lifted off some of that paint. And that's one thing about watercolor. They say you can't fix mistakes. I mean, that leg was a little too thick. Grab a firm brush, wipe, and now I just have to let that area dry. The end. Fixed. All right, I forgot to push record when I went back up to the face, but essentially I am just putting in the eye. I am using a size 1 liner brush, and I'm using the same colors that were there before, just using a darker value to create the roundness of the eye, as well as giving more shape to the nose, and adding more definition to the mouth. And then back up to the eye, because sometimes you have to let things dry, but not for too terribly long, so you can go put something in, work on another area, and then pop back up to work on what you were working on previously. Now, this eye is kind of behind the nose, and really, in the photo, I can't really see it, but I do want to suggest that it's there and show that, yeah, I know that there's another eye on this meerkat. Look, I can do an eye. I can do 2 eyes, but I definitely have one dominant eye. All right, going around with my liner brush now. I don't want to add too many details around my meerkat, but having a few really makes a difference. So I'm going in, giving some greater separation of the paws from the surrounding parts of the body. and painting in the division between the fingers. Is that what that part's called? I know they've got little claws, but they really are like hands. Right, got that little scrubber brush again, and I'm just going to scrub that little edge next to the meerkat's paw. And there. Use my paper towel to dab up the excess, and I've corrected the shape. Though it is important to know the properties of your pigments. If I had used like a phthalo color, for instance, there would have been a stain left there. But a lot of the pigments that I choose to use lift pretty well. And that is, for my techniques, an important quality I like in my paints. All right, as we get up towards the neck, I like how the fur kind of separates and ruffles a little bit. So I am suggesting that with my liner brush and then softening bits of it with my round brush. And then just dry brushing a little texture down around the neck. But notice how that side of the neck, the bluer side, just bleeds into the background, and I don't add anything to differentiate it because we have enough information that we don't need that extra info. But I do call a little more attention around the eye by adding a darker value. And then off camera, I add a little bit of gouache for some highlights, and here's the finished painting. If you like this video, press that like button so I know to make more like this. And if you want to see more from me, press subscribe because I make videos every Monday and Thursday. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye!